Hello and welcome to my channel, Oathbound Secrets. Today I do have a massive heap of books to recommend to you, all about West Country witchcraft and magic. Wow! I'm going to start off with something a little bit controversial, and that is because it's not quite West Country, okay? I'm sorry, but it's very important because it's just bordering on the West Country, and that is the lovely New Forest. And if you know anything about the modern witchcraft movement, you know that the people in the New Forest and the neighbouring areas, particularly on the edge of Dorset, the town of Christchurch, you will know actually. Oh, and also Highcliffe. Don't forget Highcliffe. I'm sorry, Highcliffe. You will know about this New Forest Coven. Okay, so this is a book by Philip Heselton. He's written a lot of books. Honestly, if you don't know about this author, what are you doing? Look at his books, because he really traces like the history of the modern witchcraft movement in England, and really focusing in on, the key characters: Gerald Gardner, Doreen Valiente, all of these people that we know and love or hate. Who knows? This is why it's also a little bit controversial, because not everybody likes Gerald Gardner, and some people consider him, I don't know, somewhat of a charlatan or something. So a lot of that is to do with his claims concerning the New Forest Coven. And what this book helps do is like unravel all of these sort of stories that were being told at the time. Because Gerald moved to the New Forest area, to Highcliffe specifically, which is a cute little town that's just outside the forest, and that's where he met some very interesting people that he said introduced themselves to him as the Wicca. That's what they called themselves, and that's where the whole term Wicca originated, was with this little group of people that wanted to reclaim the word from like Anglo-Saxon origins, and it's actually the origins of the word witch. So when they said Wicca, it actually means witch. Anyway, what it explains is who these people were and what they were all about, and it's fucking fascinating. Sorry about my language. Am I really sorry? Next, I will go into related book called West Country Wicca. Oh, now, love it or hate it. Okay, let me just read a little bit from the introduction to this book, okay, because it says here that the reason for writing this book is because no one from the pre-Gardnerian days has written an account of the old religion of that time. I do not have a title for my system of craft. It's like a personal account of Wicca in the West Country. Except that I was taught in the 1940s, before Gerald Gardner or Alex Sanders had written their books. Indeed, I was unaware of the existence of their writings for many years. We were taught by word of mouth. No notes, nothing at all written down, because most people in those days were illiterate in the 1940s. Oh dear. We had no Book of Shadows. In fact, we had not heard the phrase at that time. We were told never to discuss the craft with outsiders and had to vow not to. Ooh. Written by Rhiannon, Ryall. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. I probably am, because it's a Welsh name, isn't it? But anyway, this book, it's called West Country Wicca, and it kind of talks about the idea of these sort of secretive covens existing across the southwest region. And just like the New Forest Coven, these other covens that presumably existed were kind of dreaming up their own ideas of what a witchcraft religion was like. You know, in the early days of Wicca. In the early days of Wicca, people were basically enthralled by the idea that witches who were persecuted during the witch hunt period of like the 16th century, 17th century, roughly, they were convinced that these people were following an ancient religion and that they were part of covens of witches, performing rituals and worshipping ancient deities and blah, 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 blah. Okay, so we're talking about an era that is like 1930s, 1940s Britain. This was the idea at the time. They were like, oh, witches, they're real. And there really was a witchcraft religion, and we're going to call it Wicca. That's the origins of Wicca. So whether you consider this like factual or total fucking fantasy is really up to you, but it's very interesting. Okay, so then after these sort of Wicca-based books, we're going to go into more of the traditional magic and folklore concerning witches. So, first of all, okay, which one actually am I going to start with? West Country Witchcraft by Roy and Ursula Radford. Witches in the West Country. So, charges of witchcraft brought against women always exceeded the number of similar charges brought against men. In Devon, between 1527 and 1723, 83% of all witchcraft charges were made against women. In Cornwall and Somerset, it was 75%, and in Dorset, it was 69%. There was a change of mind in the seemingly more fair-minded Dorset after 1640. All witchcraft charges brought in the county thereafter were brought against women. Yeah. Devon increased its onslaught against the female sex to 91%. Somerset followed that pattern to 78%, and only in Cornwall was there a recorded drop to 73% in the number of witchcraft charges brought against women. The cunning men of Cornwall, it seems, were not cunning enough to escape punishment for crimes they probably didn't commit. Love that. Love it. Some statistics, some data, some very good information. Likewise, this one, same name, different authors. West Country Witchcraft by Gillian, Macdonald and Jessica Penberth. The main difference between this book and the other one, the purple one, is that this one basically looks at contemporary practitioners in the West Country and asks them questions about their beliefs, their practices, what they're doing. And for example, I will read a little paragraph. Are witches really devil worshippers or Satanists? There may well be some who claim to be Satanists, and we cannot be sure who exactly they are getting in contact with by doing so. This is a difficult area, for it seems those accused of witchcraft in the past were believed to be so, and the vast majority of those practicing witchcraft openly today denounce the very notion of a devil. It is possible that those calling themselves Satanists today are simply exploring their own darkest corners and the reflection of such evil and cruelty in mankind as a whole. We haven't as yet come across anyone in the West Country who openly admits to following this path, but have decided it's very much a case these days of each to their own. Drawing on all of the folklore and stories that people tell about the magic being used in pre-industrial Britain. That sort of era between that the witch hunting craze and sort of modernization in the 19th century. That's what they're talking about. I won't bang on about it too much because they're only little tiny books. Next, we're going to be talking about one of our favourite authors, Gemma Gary. Now, Gemma Gary has written a really lovely book called Silent as the Trees, which focuses specifically on the folklore of Devon. A farm near Axminster was frequently visited by an old reputed witch who lived nearby in a tiny cottage upon a wooded hill. She was able to live quite well on the food supplies and money she incessantly begged from the farmer and his family. Quite naturally, they became fed up with the amount of hard worked for produce that was being handed over to the woman, especially when her tone was less than polite and she would demand rather than ask for aid. And so it was decided that they would cut back on their generosity and start refusing the woman aid on some of her visits. With this, however, the woman's already limited aptitude for courtesy diminished further, and on each visit she would have become more demanding and rude than ever before. On one such visit, demanding money from the farmer's usually gentle and kind brother, he refused and snapped at the old woman, reprimanding her for her manner, whereupon she stormed off in a foul temper, screeching that he'll have no need for his money much longer. Before 3 weeks had passed, the farmer's brother had fallen suddenly ill and died. So that's fantastic. It's a big, beefy book, and I think it does a much better job than these sort of like small little. But this would be a good introduction, and then if you want to delve into much more detail, specifically about Devon, then she's obviously written quite a few books. This one, it's called The Black Toad, specifically about Gemma Gary's coven of witches in Cornwall. So let me just read a tiny bit. For the contemporary practitioner, here are provided ways and means that have been employed here in the West Country, both in previous centuries and in more recent times. The ways here explored may be quite unfamiliar or even uncomfortable to some practitioners of modern craft, from whom any notion that cursing and magical retribution may be a possibility of their path has been thoroughly trained out. However, the traditional practitioner accepts all the arts of the spirits and the old ones, but in the hopes they may never have cause to use all of them. Even some of those newly come to the contemporary traditional craft, particularly those across the Atlantic Ocean, in my experience are likely to look awkwardly upon the ceremonial and grimoire-derived practices in their eagerness to distance themselves from the ceremony of their cousins, the Wicca, and hold a perhaps understandable desire to form a craft that is entirely rustic and intuitive in its simplicity. The fact cannot be ignored, though, that our historical forebears embraced the grimoire tradition as soon as it became available to them, and the ceremonial actions, words, and designs that were found to be of use became an intrinsic part of our native folk magical tradition, where magical signs, planetary hours, working circles, and the virtues of the directions have long since been employed. What can I say? It's a nice book. She's got some cool ideas. I like it. I like it. Besides this, okay, it's important to look at books that are generally folklore books, sort of without the kind of witchcraft and Wicca layer of interpretation. So Dorset Folklore by John Symonds Udall is an absolute classic. Let me just give you like a random example of the kind of folklore found in Dorset. On Backham Down, Dorset, is a stone about 3 feet high, evidently part of a cross, and called Cross Hand Stone. Why should a cross be set up away there on the down? Well, this be tale told. Oh, I don't even know how to pronounce that. It's written in like the old Dorset dialect. Back in the Middle Ages, one dark, wild winter night, Backham priest was sent for to take the Viaticum to a dying man 2 or 3 miles off. Taking Pick's and service book, he sallied out with a brave heart on his dark, lonely way over Backham Down, and safely reached the sick man's house. But on getting in and producing what was needed for his ministration, where was the pyx? I don't even know what a pyx is. It was lost. He had dropped it on the way, and its fall on the turf of Backham Down, in the howling wind too, had not been heard. Back he toiled into the darkness and the storm, on his almost hopeless quest. Hopeless! The easiest search ever made. Up on Backham Down there was a pillar of fire, reaching from heaven to earth and steadily shining in the storm. What could this be? He struggled on faster and faster with strange half-formed hopes. He came near to the spot over which stood the calm beam in the gale. He saw numbers of cattle of various kinds gathered in a circle, kneeling round the pyx. Well, this seemed to me to be the medieval legend, rendering a reason for Backham Cross being set up there, away on the down, where, though time-worn, it yet remains. But in the last century, a rider was added as follows. The priest was much astounded at what he saw, yet not so much so but that he observed among the livestock a black horse kneeling indeed like the rest, but only on one knee. The priest said to this lukewarm beast, "Why don't you kneel on both knees like the rest?" "Wouldn't kneel at all if I could help it." "Who then are you?" "The devil." "Why do you take the form of a horse?" "So that men may steal me and get hung, and I get hold of them." Got 3 or 4 already. Absolute classic, because he was compiling this information, before any of this modern witchcraft movement began. Okay, so it's just purely looking at the actual folklore, specifically in Dorset, and you can see it's a great big chunk of a book, so it's jam packed. Then I really like this little book, Witches of Dorset, which is just a very brief pamphlet about the people who were accused of being witches in Dorset, because every county had their witch trials. And this one, I'm not actually sure how to pronounce her name because the spelling is not one that I've seen before, but I think it's just Denise. I think it's Denise. Denise Gimmerton. A 17th century case of witchcraft in Dorset occurred at Lyme Regis, where, on 1st of June 1687, Denise Gimmerton, a local housewife, was tried on several charges of bewitching her young neighbours. The case was brought by Richard Scorch, whose 18-year-old son Nathaniel had become ill the previous April after smoking tobacco from a pipe which Denise Gimmerton had prepared and offered him. At first, he suffered only weakness and general debilitation. On 23rd of May, he was taken with a violent fit, lasting 2 hours. 2 hours 6? Oh no, 2 hours. 6 people were needed to hold him down in his bed. The fits continued and grew stronger. Whenever he was taken with one of his fits, Nathaniel saw the apparition of Denise Gimmerton. After several of these violent sessions, several pins and 1 iron nail were discovered in various parts of his body. Denise always appeared to him at the same spot in the room, and when his family struck at the spot he indicated, his pain only increased, so that he begged them not to do anything. He remained weak and in a pining and languishing condition. Another witness was Mary Tillman, whose daughter Elizabeth was taken ill in the same way in 1682, when she too was 18. She had the same fits and also saw the apparition of Denise Gimmerton. Brass pins were found on her body, and when her family tried to destroy them, Elizabeth's pain increased. In one of her fits, she was unable to move over from the stool where she was sitting to her bed, and she said that Denise Gimmerton kept her there. No one could move her. Oh, Denise, what were you doing? a very nice little book. I do have quite a few books that are focusing on Dorset because that's where I live. Sorry, but Folklore of Dorset is a really nice book. This is by Fran and Geoff Doel. Do you think I can show you some of the lovely black and white photos from this book? Very charming. Let me see. There's more, but that just gives you an idea. That's very nice, isn't it? It does draw a lot on our classic John Udall. Udall? Is that how you say his name? I don't know. It does draw a lot on him as a source, but also other folklorists as well. And then if you want something that is a little bit more visual, then this book. Oh, look at that. Dorset Customs, Curiosities and Country Lore. I love this book because it's full of old photos and God, are they just enchanting. Lots of black and white photos. There's a really nice chapter in here on smuggling tunnels, underground passages and fugitive priests. Now, the interesting thing about fugitive priests was there was a time when Catholicism was made illegal, and if you were caught being a Catholic priest, you were a heretic. Not just a heretic, but kind of like a terrorist. Like this was a crime against the state, against the king, and you would be killed. And the interesting thing about these Catholic priests is that they were some of the few people that could read and write because they'd been trained and studied and would have had access to all kinds of interesting texts. And that's where a lot of the grimoire magic comes from. Actually, it comes from the libraries of the monasteries. And they had access to all kinds of interesting texts that were later circulated. So a priest could also function as a kind of magical practitioner and could be employed to protect people from witchcraft, from hexes, curses. Sorry to focus so heavily on Dorset, but I'm not sorry. It's where I live, and I think there's not enough attention, actually. There's not enough focus on Dorset. We're so just overlooked, to be honest. We're the overlooked county of the West Country. Nobody cares about us. So if you are interested in folkloric practices, then look for folklore books. You don't have to look specifically for modern witchcraft books or books that have been written in recent years, because there are much older catalogues of folklore that you can refer to. And I think it's good to have like a balance between like contemporary writers and the older stuff and compare it and contrast. When people talk about their folkloric practices, what are they basing it on? Where does it come from? Does it come from these old sort of documentation of folklore? Or is it more or less something that they've invented and made up? Because there's a lot of people that just kind of like make stuff up and then call it folklore. But really, what is folklore? What makes something folklore is the fact that it is something that is generally believed in the local community. That's why it's folk lore. The folk refers to the local community of people, and it is also a way of indirectly referring to the rural populations of pre-industrial England and the practices, beliefs and law that was held among them. So before industrialization happened and people began leaving the villages for the cities, there was this sort of shift over from the old traditional folk magic towards more modern practices, and that's what we're talking about when we look at folklore. We tend to be looking back in time to these kind of pre-industrial traditional ways of doing things, and I think that we have to accept that since this transition into the industrial era of capitalism, obviously practices and beliefs have changed a lot, and what common people believe today is going to be quite different to what people believed in the past. So I think when somebody says that they are practicing something that is folkloric, they're saying that they're drawing upon older beliefs. But are there still people that have those beliefs in your contemporary community? You know, like, I think folklore studies today need to go around like the people alive right now and ask them, what do you believe about this place, that place, you know, the history, the legends, the stories that are being told. Do you know about this legend about a holy well or whatever? Do you know about these saints? Do you know about this, that, and the other? You know, collect the information that people believe or that have heard and the stories that they are passing on. That's what folklore studies are all about. It's about studying what do common people believe outside of what a religious organization says that you should believe. That's like the contrast between what an orthodox belief of the church or a kind of religious doctrine would have to say about things versus what hasn't been sort of like stamped with the approval of officials and is just generally circulated among people. That's the folklore. I think that it's important to make a distinction between folkloric magical practices and folkloric witchcraft. Okay, so what I mean is that we have a huge body of folklore regarding witches, beliefs that people had about witches. Okay, they say that the witches did this, they say that the witches did that. That is what I would say is folkloric witchcraft. The idea of the witch, the idea of what the witch is doing, what the witches practice, where the witches go, any seasonal celebrations that the witches might perform. That's folkloric witchcraft, and it doesn't necessarily mean that there were actually people round about doing those things. It just means that this is what people believed the witches were doing. Okay, and this is where the idea of a witchcraft religion emerged. You know, it emerged out of the folklore. So Wicca, the concept of Wicca as a witch religion, is something that comes out of folklore, born from a long, long history of folklore. That's where it comes from. And I think there are times that people kind of lose track of the fact that this is you know, hundreds of years of folklore that has produced what is now a modern religion. Okay, and I will say that, yeah, a lot of people get criticized for inserting things that don't really belong in in folkloric witchcraft, such as New Age practices, such as sort of Eastern traditions, yogic practices, things like that, that are taken from other parts of the world and applied to local folklore, and in a way that just doesn't really, they don't really go together. Like, they're just not related. They're distantly related. And yeah, we can compare things that are happening in different parts of the world and say, oh, isn't that interesting? That's very similar to what we do here. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong with learning about what other people do. But I think when you're referring to something that is like place specific, such as the Southwest, then it just doesn't make sense to bring in things that aren't local. Does that make sense? When we're talking about folklore and when we're talking about folk witchcraft, the folkloric beliefs about witches, that we don't sort of muddy the water with things that don't really belong there. Who am I to say what belongs and what people should believe in? But I'm just saying, like, be aware and be clear in your communication about where different ideas come from, and acknowledge, oh, this is actually something that I learned about from Asia or the Americas or wherever. Okay. That's what I'd like to say. And I would say a final note that there's absolutely nothing wrong with people from different parts of the world coming to the West Country, for example, and sharing their different beliefs and ways of doing things, and people kind of like learning from each other and maybe like combining some ideas and melding them together and whatever. Like, that's how culture is constantly evolving, and that's cool. But just like acknowledge the fact of where these ideas come from and who introduced them. So immigrants are welcome, actually, to the West Country. Thank you very much for watching this video. I just had to like insert my little political message in there. And I hope you found these book recommendations helpful. Leave a comment, like, subscribe, all that stuff, and I will see you in the next video. Goodbye.